Lenten Thoughts, Day 22, Wednesday of the third week of Lent. You have made the commandment of God of no effect because of your tradition. Hypocrites! Well did Isaiah prophesy of you, saying, "This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me." It would seem that from these words I should be speaking against hypocrisy, which is no less the sin of Christians than of the Pharisees. But the Lord inspires in me another thought, which may perhaps be more useful for the edification of souls. I will not fight against hypocrisy today. On the contrary, I wish to attack those who claim to fight it, or rather, those who, under the pretext of combating hypocrisy, put themselves in danger of falling into other sins. I wish to consider hypocrisy not in itself, but in its consequences, not in its origin, but in its effects, not in the hypocrites themselves, but in those who observe the hypocrites. In short, I want to correct the false conclusions that people draw from the hypocrisy of others. There are three kinds of people to whom the hypocrisy of others can be harmful. First, those who take advantage of others' hypocrisy. These are the impious and the libertines. Secondly, those who are scandalized by others' hypocrisy. These are the righteous. And thirdly, those who allow themselves to be deceived by others' hypocrisy. These are the weak and the imprudent. All three believe that they are justified and excusable before God, but let us strive to destroy their error. Let us show the libertines that they have no right to take advantage of others' hypocrisy. Let us show the righteous that they have no right to be scandalized by others' hypocrisy. Finally, let us show the simple that they are not excusable before God for allowing themselves to be deceived by the hypocrisy of others. First point. From all times, libertines and the impious have sought to take advantage of hypocrisy and false devotion. If you wish to understand their secret motive, you need only listen to a remarkable observation by a bishop of Paris in his excellent discourse on this subject, in which he gathers all that can be said that is solid and insightful. Libertines, he says, never fail to take advantage of false piety, either to convince themselves that there is no true piety, or if there is, to have the right to discredit it, or finally, to make it suspect and to escape the reproaches that it makes against their own libertinism. The first trick of the libertines is to try to convince themselves that there is no such thing as true devotion. For just as the impious man is determined to remain impious, he would like others to be like him, and recognizing himself as wicked, he takes pleasure in convincing himself that those who appear righteous are no better than he is. Because the hypocrisy of false devotees seems to support his view, he clings to this illusion. And since it cannot be denied that there are hypocrites, he immediately concludes that all could be hypocrites. Eventually, he persuades himself that all righteous people actually are. In his mind, even the most upright persons are no better than he is. The only difference he sees between them and himself is that they are better at disguising and hiding their faults. If they avoid certain crude sins, he assumes they must commit more spiritual ones. And since he cannot accuse them of debauchery, he comforts himself with the thought that they must be secretly proud, making all their actions sinful. Thus, despite all the strictness of their lives, he arrogantly believes himself to be less guilty than they are, because if he is wicked, at least he is sincere, whereas others pretend to be what they are not. This is the cunning precaution of libertines, to destroy the very idea of true piety and to make people believe that what is called piety is merely an illusion, an imaginary concept that does not truly exist among men. If libertines are forced to admit that there is real and solid piety among Christians, they take another approach. They attack it and seek to discredit it by exposing the hypocritical pretensions of false devotees. They ridicule true devotion. They attribute to real piety the defects of false piety. They shift onto Christian virtues all the mockery that belongs to hypocrisy. And by this second trick, in discrediting virtues, they justify their own vices. Finally, it is enough for libertines to cast suspicion on true devotion in order to avoid the reproaches it makes against them. That is why they focus so much on pointing out the hypocrites of others, so that by making religion appear suspect everywhere, zealous persons will not dare to rebuke and censure them. This is one of the greatest injustices, says St. Gregory the Great. It is a grave iniquity when a perverse man tries to make others appear perverse, so that he may seem less wicked simply because he has convinced others that no one is truly holy. But God will not judge you, impious man, based on the appearance of others. He will judge you based on your own actions and the testimony of your own conscience. It is not a matter of escaping the reproaches of men. It is a matter of avoiding the punishments that God threatens. You may deceive men, you may deceive yourself, but you cannot deceive God. Second point. It should not be surprising that the impious take advantage of hypocrisy to confirm themselves in their impiety, since even true Christians make it a cause for scandal, so that even the elect, if it were possible, may be led into error. This scandal, which arises from the hypocrisy of others, ordinarily causes three harmful effects in the just. First, it instills in them a servile fear of being taken for hypocrites or false devotees, and this fear becomes an obstacle to fulfilling the most essential duties of religion. Secondly, it leads them to a disgust for true devotion because of the misfortune of being exposed to the suspicions of others. Thirdly, it casts them into discouragement, which gradually inclines them to abandon the cause of God rather than endure the mockery they face. First, I say that this servile fear is the most cowardly and blameworthy thing in the world. Indeed, what could be more shameful than to allow oneself to be ruled by the caprice of others, to feel forced to disguise oneself when practicing virtue, and to belong to God only to the extent that it pleases men? Could there be a greater servitude? Yet this is the condition of most Christians. When St. Augustine speaks of the philosophers and sages of paganism, he says that their condition made them the most miserable of all men, because while they knew the true God, they did not have the freedom to render him true worship, and a base fear compelled them to adore animals. Such is the condition of those cowardly Christians who enslave themselves to the world's laws and who, in order not to displease men, do not dare to please God. Fear nothing when you do good, says the great Augustine. Do not concern yourself with whether others are watching you. It matters little whether men see and judge you, as long as God is honored. If it is true that fear has no place in the soul of a wise man, then even more should it have no place in the soul of a Christian, whose profession must be to fear only God on earth. For this fear gradually leads to disgust of true devotion, because as Saint Bernard says, no one in the world is more despised than hypocrites. And since we all have within us a deep-rooted self-love that makes us hate even the slightest shadow of contempt, in order to avoid the mere suspicion of hypocrisy, we may go so far as to withdraw from and become disgusted with true piety. But this disgust is the most unfounded thing in the world. You say that the misfortune of true devotion is that it is exposed to suspicion, and that is why you turn away from it. But I say, with Saint Jerome, that this is precisely what should draw you closer to it and inspire zeal to preserve it. If anything in the world should compel you to take an interest in devotion, it is the liberty that men take in suspecting it, because it is up to you to dispel these suspicions. It is up to you to prove to others, through your own example, that no matter what the worldly think or say, there are sincere devotees who worship God in spirit and in truth. It is up to you to convince libertines and make them admit, despite the violence of their passions, that nothing prevents them from living virtuously, since there are Christians who, in the same state and condition as them, avoid sin and practice solid virtue. Will you say that taking the side of piety involves too much suffering? Alas, in the world, people take pride in suffering something for their friends when they are persecuted. And yet when God is abandoned and persecuted, we are ashamed to defend his cause. Ah, miserable soul, if God had treated you in this way when you were abandoned by all creatures, where would you be now? Third point. If there were no simplicity in the world, there would be no hypocrisy. For hypocrisy can only exist by taking advantage of others' simplicity. The hypocrite would renounce what he is if he were not certain that there are weak and simple minds capable of being deceived, and who in fact do allow themselves to be deceived. It is in this way, says Gerson, that heresiarchs have made such astonishing progress. They affected an edifying outward appearance. They condemned even the slightest laxity. They spoke only of severity and mortifications. At the mere mention of reform, these wolves in sheep's clothing managed to gather followers from among the simple-minded who were easily ensnared by their deceptive appearances. What has happened in the church regarding truth happens every day in human society regarding justice. Let a cunning man have an unjust cause, and if he covers it with the veil of devotion, he will find justice on his side. He will encounter powerful patrons who will support his interests, and without considering anything else, they will believe that they are serving God by defending him openly. Let an ambitious man hide his schemes under the noble pretext of piety, and he will find people who, deceived by his hypocrisy, will raise him to the highest ranks, no matter how unworthy he may be. These people will even believe in a virtue to promote his pride and support his most criminal intentions. Finally, let all hypocritical man commit the most cruel acts of oppression. Let him carry out his revenge to the utmost excess. He will always find weak-minded individuals who will sanctify his violence and justify his most obvious excesses. Thus, hypocrisy, by deceiving the simplicity of others, lead them into injustice. How can one protect oneself against the artifices of hypocrisy? Jesus Christ has given us sure rules to avoid them. The first rule is that the mark of true holiness is submission and obedience to the church. The second rule is that without humility there can be no virtue. With these two principles, it will be easy for you not to be deceived by hypocrisy. For one may say with absolute certainty that hypocrisy cannot coexist with submission to the church and Christian humility. Hypocrisy can counterfeit all virtues, but it cannot long counterfeit submission and humility. These virtues are too directly opposed to it. Enlighten us, O my God, in the midst of the darkness of this life. Make us recognize false virtues and true ones, so that we may avoid the former and practice the latter. Amen. Help us at gofundme.com/restore-immaculate. Thank you for your Lenten generosity. May God bless you.